My name is Christopher Spahr, and I currently work for DPA Microphones. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing in North America for DPA. But I got into this business in the recording studio world, making records for a long time. And I was working primarily out of Criteria Studios down in Miami. I was one of the staff engineers there, and then left Miami and got back up into the Philly area and just doing some stuff in various studios around the city. Of course, stuff at my house, things like that. But eventually landed at DPA Microphones, and I've been with DPA now for 8 years, I want to say. So a decent amount of time. And just to give you also kind of a backstory on DPA, and it kind of sets up this magical microphone story that I'm going to talk about, is that we come from a company called B&K, Brule and Care, that's been around since the early 40s. B&K started a Danish a measurement microphone company out of Denmark that really only made measurement microphones for the longest time. And in the 70s, I think some people started to get hip to the fact of what they were, and that they're just flat, accurate, transparent microphones. Let's see if we can use them for something other than measuring, room noise or a car or a jet engine or whatever. In the 70s is kind of when this story sets up. So I was reading a Mix magazine article. I completely just didn't realize almost the history of B&K in the studio, but I'm reading an article about how REO Speedwagon did their "You Can Tune a Fish, but You Can't Tune a Piano" record back in, I don't know whatever year, sometime in the 70s, whenever that was. And of course, I grew up on that record. My older brothers had it, so I'm like, oh, let me give it a little read. And there was an engineer named Paul Grupp, I think his name was. I could be wrong. Recorded it out in LA, I think at the record plant. But he kept referencing this old B&K magic mic that he had, or this magical mic that he used for like everything, acoustic guitar, the Marshall stacks they were using, and then ultimately for Kevin Cronin's vocals. And REO Speedwagon is kind of known for those soaring Kevin Cronin vocals from back in the day. And again, I had no idea that these mics were kind of used that way, but he took in a whole measurement microphone and basically they modified it themselves, because back then the measurement mics, they didn't have XLR connectors on them. They were outputting in a BNC connector. It was supposed to be hooked up to a measurement device of some sort. So they basically had to modify the thing. They also were a little noisy, I think too noisy for recording. So they had to modify it basically to have an XLR output on it, lowered the noise a little bit, put some different electronics in it. And then he said it was kind of his magic mic that he just pulled out of his box that no one knew existed. And he would use on all these records that he did. And I think he did a bunch of records like those bands back in the day. And it, things kind of came to life, and the acoustic guitar came to life, and the vocals, in a good sounding room just came alive, because it's an Omni mic, super accurate. You get exactly what the person's voice sounds like. And that was his secret weapon. And we're kind of still known, DPA now is kind of still known as everybody's secret weapon, or the secret tool in their toolbox, that, we're not the name that everybody recognizes, but the serious professionals kind of are always like, oh yeah, I have a DPA and I use it for this. And no one else knows about it, so don't give away our secret. But then in the 80s, B&K eventually started making some microphones that were then targeted towards the performance space. So they started making their mics with XLR connectors on it. Maybe they found out what this guy Paul was doing. I have no idea. Or maybe they heard the REO Speedwagon record and they were big fans. I don't know. But so they started making some of these performance mics, and that's eventually what turned into DPA. The guys that were doing that within B&K said, hey, why don't we just break away and start DPA, which stands for Danish Professional Audio, so another Danish company, because B&K was still really just wanted to make measurement stuff. That was their thing, still is their thing. That's all they do now. And then DPA broke away and started offering these B&K microphones with the DPA label on them. Same exact things inside, same capsules, same, still coming from the B&K factory. And we started, DPA came about in 1992, I believe. And that's what we've done ever since, is basically performance-based mics, or microphones for performances, but basically a measurement microphone. So flat, accurate, transparent, not colored, We're not doing tube mics. We're not doing, it's just, that's not our thing. Our thing is to give you exactly whatever it is, what it sounds like, a voice or a snare drum or a whatever. And since I've read this article, I've seen a couple of other things where people keep referencing a B&K Magic mic. And now I think it's hilarious that this was, I don't even know if it was a mic that had a model number on it, in all honesty. I think it just said B&K, and it was long and shiny and black and thin. And that was like the B&K Magic mic that people kept grabbing them and turning them into these performance microphones. And were making records back then with this kind of unknown B&K microphone, which I thought was hilarious. So that's, in essence, it's what we use to this day. I mean, if somebody buys a DPA 4006, which is one of our kind of common popular omni capsule microphones, it is in essence that old Magic mic that has just been, newer electronics, been adapted to, of course, today's standards. And that's the thing. So we use them all the time, and people try them in the studio for the first time, and you get the aha moment. They're like, oh my God, and I think that's exactly what they heard back in the 70s when they put it on, on Kevin Cronin's vocals for the first time. And he was like, oh my God, this is great.
Yeah. That's amazing.
You're saying I can sound like Kevin Cronin.
If you can sing that high, you can.
I mean,
Tom, buddy, I love you. You might have some work to do on the range, expanding the range.
Yeah.
But I will say, A, what a great story, and B, what a wonderful example of how I think a lot of, especially in the gear space, I think is how you get to some of these really interesting results and patterns and trends, specifically in audio and audio production, right? And getting records to sound the way that they do, right, is through like kind of a one-of-a-kind repurposing or creative reuse, right? So that's not too far. It's a microphone, right? It's meant to capture, but bringing it into that world, and then it gives this source, these capsules, and this kind of brand as a whole, almost like another secret life span and use. And now obviously, looking at the DPA website here, right? Like offering live performance, studio mics and things like that, where the signature is just transparency and the clarity of a capture. I think that's really interesting, and that's why Tom was like, we got to talk about this mic, because it's such an encompassing example of a lot of that stuff, right? Have you in terms of being a microphone guy, right, amongst other things as the day job, are there any other examples for you specifically, whether it be one of these or, that you've found? Because actually, Tom, it's funny enough, when you talk about microphones and specifically recording vocals, I think a lot of times too, some singers really like identify and really hold on to that one mic, that they're just like, they believe in it. They hear themselves back through it. A producer says, hey, let's shoot out a bunch of mics early on in their career. They find the one that wins, and they just stick with it. And that becomes part of their signature sound. Right. And I think that, especially with the RO Speedrag and stuff, like you're talking about that. Do you have any, preferences specifically, as this is, our version of the desert island gear kind of ask, which is a tough question sometimes for a lot of people. Do you have anything like that, maybe specifically a microphone that you've always loved, even if it wasn't, in the DPA category, or something that you grew up on, or even honestly, take it wherever it will go? Anything else? There is a love. We were talking about the SG that's sitting behind you on the wall right now, that kind of triggered me about one of my lost favorite guitars of many years ago. But do you have something like that that was kind of your signature piece coming up?
That's a good question. Studio wise, I grew up, I think, cutting vocals on an 87. I mean, that was kind of our go-to. That's what we grabbed all the time, and it was always my starting point. I knew where to go from there. It may not work for everybody. It didn't work for everybody, but at least it let me know kind of where to go, because I was so used to it. Now an 87 is not a flat microphone by any stretch, but it can be very favorable for some people, and it kind of, again, it's what you grow up with. It let me know exactly where to go. If it didn't work, I'd be like, okay, I know what I need now. It's definitely not the 87, but it's this. And I would go right at it. Just like, growing up starting in the business, using NS10s as an example for monitors.
Right.
Not pretty sounding, or an Aratone. Not pretty sounding, but you kind of knew where to go from there. Or if you could get it to work on an NS10, then once you put it on something bigger, Genelecs or Osberger's or whatever, it kind of came alive. And it was the same way for vocal mics for me. Yeah. I think it's that way with a lot of people. They're used to using the XYZ vocal mic to start with. And I always tell, especially when we do, as DPA, when we do demos and stuff with people, I tell them, I'm like, put up what you know, put up the 87 on vocals or put up the KM184 on the acoustic or whatever you currently use, and then stick ours next to it so you have a good reference and go from there. And then you like what you like. If you don't like it, then you don't like it, and that's fine. But at least without a reference, it's hard to know what something sounds like. And especially, again, your ears are different. You grew up listening to something or using something continuously, and it's what you like to hear. We've had lots of singers that have used our mics, especially on stage, and the front of house guy is like, oh my God, this just fixed everything I needed to fix. Like everything's cleaned up. He or she sounds fantastic in the PA. And then you go to the artist and you say, hey, how'd you like it? And the artist is like, just sounds too different in my ears, because they're used to something that they've been singing into like a 58 or something for forever. You can't take it from a 58 to one of our vocal mics that's basically a studio mic wrapped in a stage microphone package and expect them to not hear the difference. It's night and day. And sometimes it's too much night and day, and they can't handle it because it sounds too weird in their ears. And then the front of house guy's like, oh, all right.
Hey, I've seen it happen. We've tried to shoot out over the years, like veering away, seeing if our singer likes something in my band specifically, who he's a super dynamic singer, like can belt to, I'll say dangerously, like high SPL levels acoustically when he's pushing.
Yeah, Case, I want to get you an app, and I just want you to like put it in front of like Soup's mouth. Like,
yeah, it's funny now that I work for DPA, I have a bit of a different way I hear things, which has kind of spoiled me to other things, unfortunately. Like, if I hear like an upright in the studio, or even certain acoustic instruments, even drums now, and hearing them through what we currently use with DPAs, and then thinking of course, when I used to track all the time and used the normal selection of microphones on a drum kit or an upright or something, it's night and day. And now I'm like, where were these when I was making records? Like it would have made things so much easier for me, that I had to do so much kind of fixing on the back end that now, again, with the stuff that at least the DPA makes, and there's some other companies out there that make, transparent and linear flat microphones also, not just us, but we spend so much time kind of getting a good sound from our amp, with the amps or the head, pedals. I mean, the drum kit, having the snare drum that you've spent $5,000 on, it's the old Gretsch kit or whatever. And all of a sudden you put a bunch of mics up on them that completely colors the sound of what you just spent so long dialing in. And then you have to, on the back end, have to kind of try to get that sound back, with our stuff. And again, with other people's stuff as well, you put it up there and you get your sound that you've worked so hard on. So like, a good example for me, for kick drums, it was always some kind of a 47 FET combination, right? We build a tunnel out. Sometimes you have a FET in there, a 47 FET, and usually something else in there, and do kind of a blend. That was, for me, that was a really that's the only thing I ever used to use the 47 FET on, was that. And I think a lot of people are that way. It's like, it's great for kick drum. That's all we use it for. And it's like, we couldn't find anything else to put it on. And it's a cool microphone, but it was so, I don't say pigeonholed, at least for me, it was pigeonholed into that's what it worked on. And that's all I could ever really find that it worked on. Anyways, I don't know if that answered your question or not, but when you asked, that was the first thing that popped in my head, was like, it's a really nice microphone that I never figured out a way to get to use it other than kind of a couple feet out in front of a kick drum. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, that's a shame.
Honestly, I think, come to think of it, I only use it as an out kick too.
Outside kick. Yeah. I mean, that's where I've seen it the most, certainly, if anything, and would be the thing. So it's a really interesting point. I'm sure I feel like I've heard somebody like bass amp or something, you know what I mean? Like, it's like in tandem with something, but for the purposes of this, that's a great example. Anybody, if you're looking for a kick mic that from an industry wide, standpoint has been tried and true, and been tested, that's it, probably, or at least one of the handful for sure that gets the green light. Yeah.
It's fun. Well, and I bring it up. I mean, we have a kick drum mic now that we came out with earlier this year, and I bring it up because that's what we go up against a lot, especially in the studio. Yeah. That's the guy, somebody's combo. It's a 47 and it's something on the beater, and it's that's their blend. And with our microphone that we make, it's called the 4055. The idea is that you don't really need to have to blend it. It's kind of very purpose driven and good for what it is. And it struck me as like, that's how I was doing it so long for all those many years with a 47 and the, I don't know, a Beta 50, something on the beater, a D112 or a whatever on the beater. And it was always such a battle. And I'd have to, again, build the tent, the whole deal. And then I tried our mic for the first time and I'm like, oh my God, like I could have made it easier on myself.
Yeah.
And how come we didn't make this 20 years ago? So.
You know what's funny about that, and it kind of just reminds me of something that I was talking about the other day, doing kind of like a little workshop, like Q&A on Instagram, talking about kind of how to get the most out of a recording session. Whether you're engineering, producing, and learning that craft, or if you're a band going in the studio, like what to get ready for. But interestingly enough, like one of the big pillars that I've become a firm believer in, and Tom as well is, and it's been baked into just the people that I've been lucky enough to work with throughout my career as a musician, is always, if possible, leave time and don't be afraid to kind of take one leap or try one crazy thing or one new piece of gear. This is gear candy after all, right? So, but that's a great example. And it's because of that, because there are these things that you never really question. And there is certainly some merit to the idea that if it isn't broke, don't spend time trying to fix it, right? Time is very valuable. But it's things like that where every once in a while, you know what I mean, you might try out like, okay, and this is good practice, especially for a lot of engineers that I see guys doing this, where I'm like, well, that works on the kick. Like, why don't you just save yourself time and do that? And it's like, yeah, but we have this other one. Let me try it out. Maybe it's like 5 minutes, or you pull it up, gain stage, and you're like, I immediately know I'm not even going to bother trying to make that work. Or you pull up the fader and you're like, oh, and then immediately, and it's about learning and growing from that. And I think if you can, even if it's just like for one session, like one thing, even if it's a new pedal, a new plugin, whatever it might be, I think there's a really good habit to get into for that exact reason that you just mentioned. Because you might stumble upon something that kind of just completely awakens the way you think about things and the way you view microphones or, gear in general and your process. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's funny. We call it mic muscle memory because we're so used to going and grabbing what we've always grabbed, a 57 on the guitar cab or a 47 FET on the outside of the kick drum, whatever, which has worked for forever. So that's what you go back to. But if you can kind of step away from the muscle memory and grab something different to put up next to it, like you said, you bring up the fader, you kind of know within 5 minutes if it's going to work for you or not.
Right.
We always try to recommend, just like you said, try something different, or try it in it. If you're used to using it on this instrument, try it on that instrument, especially if it's a mic that is not tied to a specific instrument. It's not purpose built. It's a general mic for lots of different things. Give it a shot. If it stinks, it stinks. What are you going to do? Go back to what you currently use. Like you said, you'll lose 5 minutes. But yeah, we battle that all the time, especially because with DPA, our mics don't always look like other microphones. So we get a lot of visual mic muscle memory. It's like yours doesn't look like a vocal mic, so we don't really think it'll sound good for vocals. We think it will sound weird because of how it looks. And I'm always like, just close your eyes and listen, and you might be surprised. Yeah.
Close your eyes and listen. Also, an incredible way of thinking of things, and a really phenomenal point. I think back to even when Tom, when we were kind of thinking aesthetically, and you've worked out of Criterion, like a bunch of very legendary studios and spaces, right? I think back to Tom when we were putting together our spot in Jersey, True Level, and Tom does a lot of acoustic work, designing, and treating rooms professionally on the side as well. But one of the things when we got to the point of like, well, what color do we, do things, and or like what, materials do you use? And you're like, that's the point where you're like, well, we were all like so wrapped up in thinking about the sonics of it. And then you realize it's like, yeah, but like that is also part of the experience that pulls people out, and that inherent bias that they're going to be, if you walk into a room that looks like it sounds terrible, even though it doesn't, there's sometimes this like confirmation bias, so you can actually trick your ears. You know what I mean? Like your brain will try to trick you in that way. And unfortunately, yeah, like sometimes, a company like this or different microphones that are trying to go against the grain visually, that's sometimes a tough and difficult uphill battle, because people make a lot of assumptions based on what they see, and no one's walking around with their eyes closed, and just tapping into the heightened sense of hearing all the time. So it really takes a lot to get someone in that position to be able to do that.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not, I mean, not just the musicians, the engineers also. I mean, we're all engineers. We know we will see something that doesn't look like something else, whether it's a microphone or an amp or whatever. And we're going to be like, that's not going to sound good. That's just how we are. We have to, and trust me, I do the same thing. And you have to kind of suppress that and go, all right, let me actually listen. And maybe this person thought up a brand new design and it's completely different from what we're used to, but maybe it's going to kick ass,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to wrap it. And like, use your damn ears.
Use your ears. Yeah.
Don't judge a book by its dang cover. Don't judge a mic by its casing. Okay. That's what we're ramming home here. Well, Chris, thanks, man. This has been a great little chat. Thank you for sharing that story. Tom and I love it. So I hope everybody that's been listening enjoyed that and maybe got something to take away from it with their own journey.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.